Today we will get into actual philosophy, because remember, what did we talk about last time? First of all, we talked about different branches of philosophy, and then this poetry which they had prior to philosophy began. And I said there is actually a date we can name when philosophy did begin. So first, let's do a little review. Like I said, remember, we will be doing this review for the upcoming exam. So any of these questions could end up being on the exam. And from last time, this is all I pretty much need you to know. What is epistemology concerned with? You remember? That's the branch of philosophy which deals with what? Truth and knowledge. Okay. So if it is a question on the exam, that will be the answer, right? It will be multiple choice. We will have several options. One of them will be truth and knowledge. The other four may be anything. This will be the correct answer. How about what is metaphysics concerned with? Exactly. That is the correct answer here. Then what is ethics concerned with? Virtue and morality. Great. And what is logic concerned with? Reason and argumentation. Exactly. We will be doing these reviews at the beginning of every class, and then in the end, before the exam, I will send you just a list of these questions. The answers at that point you will have to find yourself. So if you didn't attend the class, don't remember, didn't take notes, well, you can dig it out in the book. The book actually does have this also, but on your own. Right? I'm not going to be repeating these answers anymore. We're going to do it at the beginning of class, and that's it. Let's move on. So that's the date, 585 BCE. That's the date when we say philosophy begins, and the first actual philosopher, at least as far as we are concerned, is Thales. Thales predicted a solar eclipse in 585 BCE. We know the exact date because astronomers actually figured out well, these eclipses happen at a certain point in time, and they figured out which one it was, and they know it was 585 BCE, which is what, about 2,610 years ago. Why is it different from the poets? Would the poets predict the solar eclipse? No. What do you need to predict the solar eclipse? Well, you need to do some observations, right? You need to do some calculations. You need to use reason. You need to use logic. And that is why that is such an amazing event. This is the beginning of philosophy, even though we say philosophy, but at the time there was no difference between science and philosophy. Philosophy was concerned with all sorts of things. And these first philosophers, they were wondering about these questions. What is fundamentally real, and why does change happen? None other things, but these were important questions for them. We call it cosmological period because these questions dominated this period from 585 BC to roughly middle of the 5th century BC. So for about 135 years, these questions were most important. What is fundamentally real? In other words, what is everything made of? At some point, people started wondering about that. They started looking at things and like, well, it all looks kind of different, doesn't it? They didn't have plastic balls, but they got other stuff. They got their own bodies, just like we do, some clothes, stones, grass. And they started wondering, what's the underlying nature of all that? What is the entire world made of? It all looks different. Wow, is it different stuff? Is it the same stuff? What's going on there? And why change happens? What does it mean for things to change? Things change seemingly all the time. How? These were the first questions they were asking. At the time, we can distinguish at least these three different branches of philosophy, even though philosophers didn't call them that yet. Logic, study of reasoning. For all the early philosophy, that was kind of a separate question. How do you reason about this thing? ethics, which is the study of morality in practical life, and physics. Physics at the time was part of philosophy, and that would be the study of nature. It actually, we will hear some Greek words again now and try to understand them. In fact, studying this subject, if you did study it, for example, at the University of Oxford, even today, you could take Greek language first and actually study the whole thing in Greek, because that's the best way to do it. We're obviously not going to study the whole Greek language, but we need some words. Why? Because it is different from modern English, and the mentality is different. To understand how these people think, we need at least few terms which we don't use. They were using it. So they were known as physikoid. Physikoid, related to modern word physics, it actually comes from the word physis, which means nature. They were trying to study nature, so we call them physikoid. They were asking, how did the world begin? Did it have a beginning or not? Did it develop? What was happening after this first point? And what are these constituent elements everything is made of? Remember we talked about Hesiod last time. Hesiod actually, if you paid attention, has this beautiful poem explaining all those things. But remember how Hesiod explained it. He was trying to gather all these fairy tales, all those stories which were passing on from generation to generation about various gods, what was happening with them. The fundamental difference with these philosophers is just like with solar eclipse. They were trying to actually use their reason and ask, okay, it's beautiful, but is this really how it began? Can we be sure, like, the different gods created? Do we have any proof of that? Have you guys seen any gods? No. And I can assure you, Greek people didn't see them either. It's not like they were meeting them on a regular basis. So some people, even at the time, were questioning all that. And those were the first philosophers. They were saying, great story to tell your children. But can we be sure of any of that? The honest answer is not really. Let's ask ourselves using reason. How did it all begin? They didn't have much of equipment, but nonetheless, they were speculating about that. So this is the rational approach. Remember the word cosmos, which we still use today, means order. Systematic whole. So they were trying to use the systematic rational approach to understand the reality around them and to figure out, is there any order to all this? Are these lightning strikes just randomly happen, or are they happening together with something else? Where do you usually see lightning strike? Can it just come out of the blue sky for no reason whatsoever? No. You usually have thunder, right? You have clouds. You have, if not rain, then at least situation close to it. So that is something you may know, and all sorts of other things. Like I said, one question, fundamental question, the first philosophers were wondering about what is everything made of. And they used this Greek word archaea. It's important to understand this word because archaea does mean several things. It's not like the English word substance, which we can use like, if we talk about bottle is made of substance. Right? They use the word archaea, which means origin or principle of action. And archaea to them meant whatever was there at the beginning, which is underlying nature of all the things around. They were looking for this archaea. Here's the map of Greek part of the world at the time. The first philosophers actually didn't live in Greece. They lived here on the other coast, which today is Turkey. At the time, it was all part of Greek peoples, you may say, because there was no country of Greece, right? They didn't have a country, but they had people who had something in common. First of all, Greek language and Greek tradition. And they were living around this entire area. This part is still Greece today. The Greek people live there, speak Greek language. This part today is actually Turkey. They speak Turkish language, and in fact, they're Muslim. So that's totally different now. But back in the day, there were Greek people living here, and that is known as Ionia. This part here is Ionia, so they're called Ionian philosophers. And the city is Milet. For this reason, sometimes we call them Miletians. So Miletians or Ionians. This is where the Thales lived, and a few other important philosophers we will talk about today. So Thales was Miletian. He was from Miletus. He is considered the first philosopher for this reason that he predicted that solar eclipse. Unfortunately, no work of his survived. It's been 2,600 years. If he wrote something, it's been burned, lost, disappeared, and no trace of it remains. We have some testimony. We actually have other people who at least heard something about him before and passed it on. So what testimony do we have? First of all, Heraclitus, who lived several hundred years after Thales, has written this. As they were having equal success in the war, it happened that in the 6th year, when a battle was being fought, the day suddenly became night. Thales of Miletus has foretold to the Ionians that the loss of daylight would occur, setting it as a limit the very year in which the event occurred. What is he saying here? There was war. Two sides were battling each other. Suddenly, the solar eclipse happened. And it turned out that Thales predicted that. He predicted the year. Notice that he says, a limit the very year. He did not say it will happen on this day. They did not have that precise of calculation. You need modern technology for that. But he predicted the year. He said in that year there'll be solar eclipse. And it so happened that it happened during the battle. And as you can imagine, when people battling each other, dying, they are looking for signs. And they saw this amazing sign. The sun suddenly became dark. And somebody obviously remembered, wait a minute, that guy Thales, he said it was going to happen. Amazing, isn't it? So Herodotus later heard about it, he wrote it down, so that's how we know it actually happened. Obviously, that was very different from their religious authorities and so on. They had some prophets who were prophesying. There was a famous prophet at Delphi who was also predicting things, but that was a little bit of cheating, I guess, right? When they making these kinds of predictions, it's like today if you go to a magician, and a magician will tell you, not a magician, some of those people with tarot cards, like the tarot cards, they read your future and they can, oh, I see a dark woman in your future. Who is that? I don't know, my sister-in-law, she's in the dark. Okay, that's her then. So that is not a real prediction. But what Thales did was real prediction. Why? Because he used this rational, he used some calculation. What we think today is most likely what happened is they were observing it for hundreds of years. There were some records of when it happens, and he was able to calculate based on that what year most likely, again, we will see the solar eclipse. That's probably how he did that. However, he used it in this way to predict it correctly, and people were amazed. What else do we know about this guy, Thales? There are a couple of interesting anecdotes about him which have been preserved in Testimonia. One of them is this. They say that once when Thales was gazing upwards while doing astronomy, he fell into a well. And that a witty and charming Thracian servant girl made fun of him for being eager to know the things were in heavens, but failing to notice what was just behind him and right by his feet. What do you think that story is trying to tell us?
That sometimes you're looking too far into the future and focusing on like your goals and ambitions that you're not actually realizing what you have in the present moment.
Who is you in this case? Who are they talking about?
Well, anyone essentially, like any person.
They're not saying anyone. They are talking about Thales. So philosophers. And even today, aren't you hearing things like, oh, philosophers? They just somewhere out there, they don't not connected with real life. They are too concerned with things like what is the nature of reality, and they don't even see what's going on in their own feet. So basically, that's kind of a joke made at his expense. But there is another story which actually is quite opposite. This is how it goes. The story goes that when they were reproaching him for his poverty, supposing that philosophy is useless, he learned from his astronomy that the olive crop would be large. Then, while it was still winter, he obtained a little money and made deposits on all the olive presses, both in Miletus and in Chios. And since no one bid against him, he rented them cheaply. When time came, suddenly many requests for presses all at once, and he rented them out on whatever terms he wished, and he made a great deal of money. In this way, he proved that philosophers can easily be wealthy if they wish, but this is not what they're interested in. So that's kind of his response to the previous story. Right? Yes, philosophers typically don't have much money. But what he's trying to say here is not because they can't have money. It's because they don't care about money. If they want to have money, they can. So what if you do? Well, in today's terms, you can say it's a little bit of price gouging. Right? He purchased those old presses, knowing ahead of time, using astronomy, that there will be a very good crop. So when that crop happened, everybody needed the olive press, because that's how they were making olive oil out of olive. And he got all of them. So because he was controlling that entire stock, he was able to charge them crazy prices. And they had to pay. And he made a lot of money. He rented them, they were not his, but the money he paid to rent them was actually a lot less than what he was able to get. However, he didn't do it for the money. He did it just to prove the point. But if you use this rational approach, you can be rich. In this case, though, he was showing that I don't want to be rich. I would rather think of other things, which are more important to me. But don't think that just because I'm doing that, I'm so useless. I'm actually smarter than you. It's just that, I do not care about money very much. How truthful are the stories? We actually don't know, because it's been such a long time, and these stories are preserved. In this case, Aristotle tells us this. Aristotle lived about 250 years after that. So as you can imagine, even today, if somebody lived 250 years ago, how sure can we be that the story about them is true? Not that sure. But back then, they didn't have reliable records, they didn't have newspapers or anything like this. So these stories could be distorted, made up, who knows. Nonetheless, it kind of shows us something interesting about. So this is the first of the three Eurasian philosophers which we will mention. Other things he supposedly was saying, which testimony preserved, is this: movement is caused by the soul. You need a soul in order for something to move. What is he saying? Well, basically, some objects don't move, right? Can this bottle move by itself? No. But other objects can move. What objects can move? Well, obviously, human beings, right? I can move across this room and back. You guys can move. Animals can move. What else can move? They noticed one interesting thing. A magnet can move iron. Have you seen that? If you have a magnet and you have a piece of iron and you put this magnet close to iron, it moves. So she concluded that magnet must have soul too. Because magnet makes things move, just like human beings. It may seem strange to us, but to them it actually made some kind of sense. Since it moves things, it must have soul, because the soul is what makes things move. He also thought that Earth rests on water. Remember, that actually is something which we saw even before him, and he agreed that that makes sense, because again, if you go very far, but you don't have an airplane or any other way to see it from above, and you don't know that the Earth is round and all this stuff we know today, you may notice that wherever you go, you eventually reach the ocean. And for this reason, they thought that That's just how the whole thing is set up. You have water all around, and the flat Earth is kind of in the middle of that entire thing. And he actually thought that everything is made of water. He thought water is the arche. Remember this word arche? Arche, the underlying nature of reality. Why do you think about it was water?
Yeah, is it because everything is made out of water?
Well, how would you reason? Like some things don't, like this table, how is it made out of water? I don't know. Not really water. But are there other things which you may not see water at first, but then like if you poke it or something? Yeah, like vegetables, fruits, you can squeeze some sort of water out of them. Human beings, definitely a lot of water. If you squeeze human being hard enough, we're full of water. Why? I mean, it is watery. Also, there's water in other liquids which come out of us, including the one which is responsible for the birth of children. That's very watery. So it seems like first there's water, but then there's something growing out of it. And he thought everything is made of water. It's just some things have water so entrenched, like the table or the stones, that you can't really squeeze it. You need to squeeze it so hard that you just don't have enough force to squeeze it. But if you did, you would find water there too. And other things are more obvious to me. So to him, the whole thing kind of made sense. He thought they are covered with water. Everything is made of water. And water, in a sense, is also origin of all things, and that at some point maybe there was no earth, but there was just an ocean, right? And out of this ocean, the earth appeared, and then people appeared, and so on. So in that sense, arche would be the beginning of it. It's both this underlying thing and the beginning. Next, that's pretty much all we know about him. Next, there was another philosopher who we think was his student, because he lived a little bit later. His name is Anaximander. Anaximander was supposedly a student of Thales, and we know a little bit more about him because there's actually some writings which supposedly belong to him, and we already have some words which he himself has written down. So he disagreed with his teacher. This frequently is the case, right? He actually didn't think it was water. He thought it was apeiron. Apeiron. What is the apeiron? Well, peiros in Greek means the boundary, and apeiron is just something which has no boundary. We can say in English, it's like stuff, some sort of stuff, right? So this is the testimony from Aristotle. He says, for some make the infinite or apeiron this, namely the arche, whatever everything is made of, rather than air or water, so that the others are not destroyed by one of them that is infinite. Infinite or boundless is pretty much for them the same thing. So apeiron. He didn't think it can be water. He didn't think it can be any of the other elements we actually have, but he thought it was some stuff which is basically just doesn't have any boundaries, right? Is infinite in nature, and that's what everything is made of. We can't see it because it is so tiny inside everything, but that's what he thought it was. The reasoning was like this. They contain a position with regard to one another, the things, right? Air is cold, water is wet, fire is hot. How can everything be made of the same stuff if it is water when you have fire, which supposedly burns water, right? Water can stand fire. So to think that fire is also made of water seems a little crazy. That was his reason. So that indefinite or infinite or the stuff is what underlies everything. Doesn't have an archaea, but this seems to be the archaea of the rest. So there's nothing underlying apeiron, but apeiron is everything, contains all things and steers all things. That's an interesting point, because to them, the archaea, that element which everything it consists of, is also an element of change, the element which drives them. It's like aliveness. Like, why? Why do you think it has to be alive? Why can't it be dead matter? Yeah. Yeah, because things are moving, very obvious. And how can they be moving if nothing moves them? So you thought they thought whatever is made of stuff, that stuff is also what is moving them. To them it made sense. They didn't separate that. We can say there is a force and there is matter. Even though actually the modern physics, if you look at it, they now starting to think that matter is force. But that's already a more recent development. So that's what they thought. His cosmology was also interesting. He again had some ideas about the entire universe, what it's made of. So he thought the stars come to be as a circle of fire, separated off from the fire of cosmos, encircling the dark mist. And there are vents, certain tube-like passages at which the stars appear. So they were looking at the sky just like we do, and they saw the stars there, and they were trying to wonder, what the hell is this stuff? What is it? And that was his explanation, right? So there is a circle of fire, and there's like holes. And the stars is what we see through those holes. See the idea? There is a lot of fire there, but only through the certain holes, a little bit of fire coming through, and that's the star. Well, it seems crazy, but I mean, in some sense, if you don't know any better, that kind of makes sense. The moon appears sometimes waxing, sometimes waning, as the passages are blocked or open, right? Because lunar eclipse, the moon suddenly disappears. Why? Well, the passage through which it kind of the shining goes through gets blocked by something, and so we don't see it. The circle of the sun is 27 times, very precise calculation, that of the earth, and that of the moon, 18 times that of the moon, and the sun is the highest, and the circles of the fixed stars are the lowest. So the stars are closer to the earth. If this is the earth, which is at the center, this is the stars, then the sun is actually further away. Strange, but that's how he thought it was. This is kind of a picture. This is the earth, which they thought was flat, but since everything is around it, it's kind of like this cylindrical. Then the stars, then the moon, and then the sun. That's how he thought the whole thing is set up. Earth has to be flat. Because it, again, based on reason, if it wasn't flat, like imagine if you have a ball, how easy it is to stand on it, you're going to fall down. So the earth, if it was round, we would also be falling down. But since it's flat, we don't. However, interestingly enough, they did place it in the center. It still has to be in the center. Why? Well, you can kind of see that stuff is moving like this around. So if it wasn't the center, how could that be happening? Hence, he thought that the earth actually rests on nothing at all. Which seems like a strange idea, but he had his reasoning. He thought if it's at the very center, nothing has to hold. Because of this principle, which we today call principle of sufficient reason. It's an interesting principle. So basically the idea is this. If a donkey stands equal distance from two piles of food, which pile the donkey is going to go to? Donkey has to have a reason to go to one rather than the other, right? If one of them is closer, donkey will obviously go towards the one which is closer. But if they walk equal distance, which one the donkey will go to? And the answer would be neither of them, and the donkey will die of hunger. So based on similar principle, the earth is at the center because it has no reason to fall in any direction. And so it has to be at the center. And he also talks about first humans. That's actually interesting. Where did humans come from? So this is his idea. He also declares that in the beginning, humans were born from animals of different kinds. Since other animals quickly manage on their own, and humans alone require lengthy nursing. Right? So that's the idea. How long does it take for a human being to become old enough to take care of it? That's a long time, right? 1 year old, any animal can kill it. 2 years old, same thing. So he was thinking back and thinking, well, there got to be first humans. They were very small, so if they came by themselves, they would have been killed. They must have come from different animals which don't have that lengthy period. For this reason, they would not have survived if they had them like this at the beginning. So it's a type of an evolution here. It's not exactly evolution, but there's already some ideas here similar to that. So what problem was he trying to resolve? The problem, I already said, that we have a very long period of time when we are very helpless. And if there were humans appearing first, these humans would have died before they reached 10 years old. There had to be a first human of some kind. So there must have been different types of animals. Then they somehow became human. And he had some interesting idea on justice. So they were also thinking, well, that's part of ethics. What exactly is justice? So this is what you were saying. The things that perish into things from which they come to be, according to necessity, for they pay penalty and retribution to each other for their injustice, and according to an ordering of time, as he says in very poetic language. So this is not his book. This is from Simplicicus, who describes what he thought about justice. So that's interesting. He's saying that things pay retribution to each other according to justice. What does he mean? What can you understand his idea of justice? What exactly he thinks justice is? Yeah, repayment. So basically, what do you repay for?
Is it your actions? Like your actions or like your sins? If he's talking about like repayment, then
Retribution. He uses the word retribution, but he talks about inanimate things. So basically, to say that one thing is cold and the other thing is hot, so the cold thing kind of steals, the hot thing steals the warmth from the cold one, right? And that's injustice. But then justice would be what? They both become at the same temperature. So that's kind of the idea of justice in nature. So he thinks that if some things become something and at the expense of other things, be it in temperature, in size, or whatever else, the justice would be returned to the original state. So that everyone is equal. Yeah.
So like if you were to use plants and animals in order to grow, you would then, once you get big, you would then breed more animals, plant more plants kind of thing?
Well, if you put it into humans, right? He's not talking about humans here, but if you talk about humans, yeah, I guess that. And between human beings, it's easier to understand. What would then be justice between human beings? If I hurt you, me. If I borrow money from you, I have to return it. In any way I affect you, you have the right to affect me in the same way. So that the whole thing would equalize.
The beginning of eye for an eye?
Yeah, well, yeah, that obviously is similar idea. Eye for an eye. Why eye for an eye? Because if I took your eye, it's unfair. If you take my eye, then it is fair. We kind of equalized it. We both have no eye. Well, that is one of the oldest ideas of justice, and actually it is still with us today, right? What do we say today when we mean justice? Well, what is karma?
Religion-wise, it's just the cycle.
Well, not religion-wise, but most people, when they say, well, it's karma, what do they mean?
They do kind of imply justice as well.
So again, it's type of equalization, right? If you did something to somebody, and usually it is to somebody, because I mean, we cannot do just to the bottle of water doesn't care. But if I do something to you, the karma is that even if you don't do something to me, something else will do something to me, which will punish me for doing something to you. And then it will equalize. So again, in the sense of eye for an eye, if I took your eye and you can't take mine, maybe somebody else will take my eye, and that's the karma. That will get me eventually. Okay, it's an interesting idea. We have to keep it in mind because we will see different idea of justice. And then his student, that's the third one of these relations, Anaximenes. Anaximenes was supposedly student of Anaximander, and Anaximenes also had his ideas, which were different from both Thales and Anaximander. He disagreed with both of them. They are not as interesting, so we're not going to dwell on them. But his ideas were, first of all, because the arche is air, not water, not aperon, air. Because air is the beginning of everything. Why do you think about it was air? Is air everywhere? Well, if you think about it, many things can be turned into air, right? Like let's say water. If you boil water, where does it go? To the air, right? Essentially. We know it becomes steam and we just can't see it, but if you didn't have the sophisticated methods, all you see is disappears. It literally disappears. You boil it and there's less and less of it, and then it's gone. So it somehow entered the air. And if the air is so pervasive, it can enter anything. So just like with water, if you squeeze things hard enough, you will find air inside of them. So he thought air was actually archaea, and change would be just this rarefication and condensation of air. Air becomes more condensed or it becomes more rarefied. So flame, for example, would be phenotype of air, and then air itself is air, and earth would be thicker air. When air thickens up, it becomes fluid. It becomes hard object. He also actually had a first experiment to prove it, which is kind of interesting. He was blowing on his hand. And if you blow on your hand like this, it's warm, right? But if you blow like this, so he thought that's because when you blow it like this, the opening is much smaller, so the air actually is more condensed. But if you do it like this, the opening is bigger, and so the air is more rarefied. But actually, even at the time, people objected to that. What is the obvious objection to that? Why is the air warm when you go this? It's air itself. It comes out inside your body. Inside your body is warm, right? So when you just blow like this, that doesn't have this internal type of warmth. But, well, for him, it kind of didn't take away. Okay, next philosopher, which we'll talk about, and we'll cover a bunch of them because they all have their own contributions to those pre-Socratic. We will dwell on other philosophers more in the future. But just for now, we're going to go through several of them, most important stuff. But a lot of it is interesting because think about it, they were the first ones. They were trying to figure out all these things, and they got interesting ideas. So let's look at this guy, Xenophanes. Xenophanes lived around the same time. He actually left Ionia at the age of 25, but he's still considered Ionian. And he was more of a poet, but he was philosophically minded poet. And some of the things he was saying are very important, especially his contributions to epistemology and theology. What is epistemology? Remember? Truth and knowledge. So he got something to say about that. Do you know what theology is? We heard this word theology. Theos in Greek means God. The theology is part of philosophy which studies God, religious. Okay, so what does he have to say about that? First of all, he actually was very critical of the poets before him, such as Homer and Hesiod. And he was critical, among other things, about their idea of God. Here's what he was saying. Both Homer and Hesiod have ascribed to the gods all deeds which among men are matters of reproach and blame, thieving, adultery, deceiving one another. Mortals believe that the gods are born and have human clothing, voice, bodily form. While Ethiopians say their gods are snub-nosed and black, Thracians, there's a blue-eyed and red hair. What do you think he's saying here? What is he criticizing?
I feel like he's criticizing their how a lot of their beliefs were based around their concept of what a god was, and that their gods were like not anything to look up to in a sense. And then how on the opposing end, like Ethiopians had a whole different concept and even construct that looked entirely different from their Greek gods.
Yeah, so basically, his point, first of all, is gods cannot be like humans. How can gods be, first of all, well, he talks about them committing theft, adultery, deceiving one. That's not God, if it acts like this. Second of all, how can they be born and die and have human clothing, voice, and bodily form? Well, actually, they were deathless, but they were born. And then he makes a point and says, when humans think about God, they try to make God just like they themselves are. So that's why he's saying Ethiopians have their gods snub-nosed and black, because Ethiopians are snub-nosed and black. And Thracians, which are like modern Germans, have their gods blue-eyed and red-haired. So he's saying people make their gods just like they themselves are, because that way it makes more sense to them. But that can't be the truth. What is the truth then? You usually get some ideas about that. But let's continue with the criticism of religions. He says, if oxen or horses or lions had hands or were able to draw with their hands and accomplish the same work as men, horses would draw figures of gods resembling horses, and oxen resembling oxen. And each would make their gods' bodies have the same bodily form as they themselves had. So that's his point. He's saying, yeah, like if horses could come up with that, they'll probably be all God horses. And we are trying to come up with gods which are like God human beings. But then you got some ideas, like I said, about what God's supposed to be. First of all, he said God is one, not multiple, not a group of gods. Greatest among God and man, not at all like mortals in bodily form or form. God doesn't have hands, he doesn't have legs, he doesn't run around. All of him sees, all of him thinks, and all of him hears. So even though he doesn't have ears like we do, he hears everything. Doesn't have eyes like we do, he sees everything. But without effort, he shakes all things by the thought of his mind. So he controls the world just by his mind. That's a very different idea from those before him, right? And he uses it on actually reason. Note that it's not a fairy tale to him. He just uses his reason. He's trying to say, how can gods be like the way my fellow Greeks think? If there is God, God has to be like that. It has to be one, all-powerful, not like human beings, without a head, without hands, without anything, but in control of everything. And also not deceitful, not naughty. So that idea already appeared at the time, and that idea now is philosophical because it's not based on fairy tales and stories, it's based on his reasoning about what God would have to be. Now, epistemology, theory of knowledge. He had some things to say here too. He actually was rather skeptical. He is first what we call skeptic. No man has seen, nor will there be anyone who knows the clear truth about gods and about all the things they speak of. So he admits, I don't know this stuff. I'm making it up. I'm just using my reason to try to figure out if there is God, what this God would have to be like. Or even if a person should in fact say what has come to pass. Nevertheless, he himself doesn't know. But in all cases, it is opinion that has been wrong. So you can only guess about this kind of stuff. You can do your best, but you can't know for sure. By no means did the gods intimate all things or mortals from the beginning, but in time, by searching, they discover better. So if you continue this rational approach, we will find better explanations, which will never be the final ones. You will never know the complete truth, but they'll be better. You will get better truth. So this is already very interesting approach, philosophical. His idea of knowledge now becomes more sophisticated. He thinks that there are three different things we can say. First, we can say something, let's call it P, is true. There's one thing to say P is true, and it is different from say somebody correctly believes that P is true. So there could be, again, remember our example from last. There could be 10 students in a room next to ours, and that is true, but I may have a different view. It's a different thing for me to believe there are 10 students from the fact that there actually are 10 students. And it's still a different thing to know that there are 10 students because something else is needed, not just my lucky guess. So that already happened at the time, and it is very interesting thing. So those early Ionians, they did achieve something. They may seem like their ideas were kind of crazy, but they were not. Because first of all, they did away with this idea of gods as basically human beings. Gods to them already become something else. It's no longer the case that if the lightning strikes, it's because Zeus threw the thunderbolt. No longer can puzzling events be shrugged off as, oh, the gods just will it. They thought,
Not bad.
we didn't breathe.
I hope so.
Yeah, so there is some rational order. We just have to understand it, and we may never completely know it, but if we use the right approach, we can actually get there. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the reading. Hopefully you guys did the reading. So what do you think about it? Did you like it? Did you get anything interesting in it?
It was kind of weird. I had a hard time understanding.
Well, it was written 2,500 years ago. So yeah, it is a little bit weird, but was there something interesting? Some of these sayings. This is the sayings by Heraclitus, who we'll talk about now. He is considered one of the most interesting and exciting philosophers of this period. His ideas are very influential, very, very. We will actually see them echoing all the way to almost our time. But you have to approach it carefully, right? Because it's not really a story. It's just different things he said at different times. But let's think about some of them. Let's see that there's several ones I picked out. The first one, we should not be the children of our parents. What do you think he's saying? Yeah.
Maybe it's like just be your own person.
And yeah, basically, don't just believe everything your parents tell you. Don't just do everything they want you to do. Be your own person, right? Because you have your own mind. And your parents may be right a lot, but they are not always right. You have to have your own opinions and be your own man. Here's another interesting one. Dogs bark at everyone they do not know. What is he trying to say here? You talking about dogs? No. Who is he talking about? Humans. And what is his point yet?
Maybe humans just being scared of the unknown.
Yes, we as human beings don't like things we don't know. We try to avoid them, so anything unknown to us seems like danger, seems like a bad thing. That is a human thing to do. Another thing, he says, Heraclitus, well, somebody, and that's not his word, but somebody reports that Heraclitus said that Homer deserves to be expelled from the contest and flogged, like Archaeopus had was. Why? So what is he saying? Remember Homer. We talked about Homer last time. So, does he like Homer? Not really. Why not? Why do you think he doesn't like Homer? Such a beautiful poetry. Concepts on gods, just like Xenophanes, his ideas about human beings. What is the way to live for human? Remember, what was, according to Homer, the best way to live your life? Courage, ability, yeah, warrior-like. So again, all those things Heraclitus actually, for some of it, he actually did agree with. But overall, he still thought that was very simplistic, and he thought Homer should not be used as a teacher to human beings because Homer is not using his reason. He is just coming up with some pretty stories to entertain people. And another one from there. Eyes and ears are bad witnesses to the people if they have barbarian souls. What is he saying here? And he doesn't mean literally barbarian, right? In this case, what is
If someone's a bad person, what they see and hear, how they'll interpret it will also be bad.
kind of not a bad person? Because bad person, who's bad, who's not bad, is a stupid. Hey, that's a better word. Like if you are stupid, you may think that you heard something, but that actually is not what you. So be careful listening to even your own eyes and ears, because what you see and what you hear, you have to interpret it correctly. They can be good for many purposes, but be careful with that. If you have a barbarian soul, in other words, if you are not a smart person, then whatever you're thinking about things may actually turn out to be not what things really are. These are some of those things. Okay, well, I'm actually going to be handing out some extra credits to some of you guys who like answering. So this is the extra credit list. You have a pen? Okay. And also, you were very active with it. So I'll try my best to remember who answered that and give you extra credit. And it also will go towards the participation part. And to keep track of that. Exams. Great. I do want you to do this reading. You're not technically required, but I really like for you to do it. Because you see, if you actually approach it carefully and think about them, they can tell you a lot of things. And all the philosophers we're going to talk about, it will get a little more complicated and sophisticated, but nonetheless, it's actually a good skill to be able to read difficult text and understand it. Hopefully one of those things you can learn in this class. Sure.
So there was one part I didn't really understand, and well, a few parts. But the one part that I really didn't understand came from the senses. I didn't understand what he meant when he said asses. He was like, he said that asses like rubbish more than gold, but I didn't understand what asses were in that part.
Asses like rubbish more than gold. Again, he probably talks about human beings, right? If you think about it, what kind of human beings could he be talking about? Rubbish more than gold. Gold, not literally, right? He's not talking about literal gold, like money. But stupid people like, I say, bad things more than good things. So that is the meaning. For example, you know what is good for you, like exercise, know what is bad for you, like fast food. But you may go for fast food rather than exercise. That could be like one example. Obviously, Greeks had some things, but that is more or less, I guess, the moral of that statement. Okay, we will talk about more of these sayings with some of them there, because some of them actually do require more of an explanation. So this is the guy, Heraclitus. He lived roughly between 540, so he was already born after Thales died quite a bit later. Thales, remember, the year he predicted solar eclipse was 585, and Heraclitus was born 540. And since we are going backwards in time, that happened 45 years later. So it's highly unlikely that he ever overlapped with the life of Thales, and even if he did, he'd be a tiny little baby when Thales was still alive. He belonged to a very aristocratic family in Ephesus, and supposedly he was even qualified to become a king. But he refused. He said, I don't want that. That is not of interest to me. I do not want to be a king. There's very little we know about them, partly again because it's been such a long time ago. Many things which we have this information from somebody who lived later on may be false. So we have to be very careful about all the stories about them and what they say this person was or whose son he was and so on. But at least some of it is probably true. So this is the part of it which probably is true. He also was very contemptuous towards others. We already saw him criticizing Homer. Homer is not the only person he criticized. That was also in the reading, right? If you read it, here's some of the things he was saying. The best renounce all for one thing, the eternal fame of mortals, but the many stuff themselves like cattle. So again, he is saying that very few people actually are smart enough, but majority of people are like cattle. They just go after the simple things. Much learning does not teach insight. Otherwise, it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras. We'll talk about Pythagoras next time. Xenophanes and Heraclitus. Xenophanes, we just saw, and he also criticizes Xenophanes. He thinks Xenophanes also is wrong on many things. So he basically says that just because somebody appears to be smart, they're not necessarily smart. There are plenty of people who have good reputation and everybody admires them and thinks they are so wise when they are not. Pythagoras, son of Niazarchus, practiced inquiry. We'll talk about Pythagoras next. Practiced inquiry more than all other men, and making a selection of these writings, constructed his own wisdom, polyphony, evil trickery. So basically, when we talk about Pythagoras, you will see that Pythagoras had like a religious following. He is considered one of the philosophers because some of his ideas were very influential. But in the same time, there is kind of this cult feeling to it. The Pythagoreans were like members of the cult. They believed Pythagoras was like God. So that is one of the parts Heraclitus is criticized. He says he may have been a very learned man, but because of all these things, it's evil trickery. He was just tricking people into following and believing. Now the Logos. The Logos is actually the beginning, right? That's the beginning of his book, and it is an important concept. So let us first read it and then think about what he's saying here. What I'll explain to you what Logos is. So he says this Logos holds always, but humans always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For although all things come to be in accordance with this Logos, humans are like inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature and saying how it is. But other people fail to notice what they do when they awake, just as they forget what they do when they sleep. This is a translation from Greek. It's a little awkward in English, especially since it's written back then, but they do not translate the word logos. They keep it in Greek. That actually is a Greek word, right? In English, we write logos. The Greek word actually in Greek letters written like this. Logos. Why do we not translate it? Because if you translate it, you lose a lot of its original sense. And it is a very important word. Let's look at this text. It's not in English. It's actually in Greek. But it will help us to understand a little bit better what are they talking about. So first I'm going to read it in Greek. Anarche hecho logos, kai ho logos, and prostontion, kai tion, and ho logos. In Greek, you're obviously not going to recognize it because you never heard it in Greek. But if any of you know Bible, you actually will recognize it very quickly once I start translating it. Archaea. Anarchaea means at the beginning. Archaea, remember, is beginning of everything. It's underlying structure and the beginning. And for logos, here translated is there was word. In the beginning, there was word. Do you recognize it? Does anybody know it? John 1:1. In the beginning, there was word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. But if you read it in Greek, you'll understand that there are several layers to this meaning. First of all, archaea is not just the beginning. Archaea is also what underlies everything. And logos is not just word. Logos is also the rational structure of everything. Greeks distinguished muphos and logos. Muphos is also a story, but a story based on just made up. Logos is a story with reasoning. So the word which has reason, the reasonable speech, or a description would be logos, which is why it is different, completely different from the original translation. If you translate it in a different way, you can say, at the core of everything, there was reason. And the reason was with God, and the reason was God, which is totally different than the first reading, right? So that's why, like I said, some Greek terms you cannot translate into English. Same thing applies. Why, by the way, is it in Greek? Well, it's a New Testament. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the Bible was written, there are two parts, right? Old Testament and New one. Old Testament is actually in Hebrew, in the Jewish language, because it's from Jewish religion. But the New Testament was written in Greek. Even though Jesus himself, we don't know if he spoke Greek, but probably not. However, when they were writing it down, they educated people who were writing down the Old Testament, the New Testament, for Greek scribes. And Greek language at the time was considered a language of educated people, so they wrote the whole thing in Greek. What you read today in English is translation, but the original is in Greek. And it's closely connected to all those Greeks we talk about right now, because as we will talk about later in class, when first Christianity emerged, all the religions, all the philosophical ideas of the Greeks were present, and they were kind of mixing with Christianity. Anyway, so that's why the word logos is such an important word. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about, first of all, not just words, but the ration or reason of everything. So reason separate from just words. Words don't always have reason, right? You can have a collection of words which is just fairy tale. But you can also have a collection of words which has reason in it. And in particular, if you do logic with me, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. This rational structure, which you study in philosophy 1 and 2. That is logos, which is why the word logike, logic, comes from the word logos. They're closely related. So that's another part from his work. It says, listening not to me, but to the logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. Logos would be reason in this case. Reason tells you that all things are one. Now, how did he explain change? What was he saying about change? He had some very interesting ideas about change. One of his famous sayings is, you cannot step into the same river twice. Why not? What's the problem? Why can't you step into the same river twice? Can you? Yes.
Is it because you would have learned your lesson like the first time? Is that what it's trying to say?
No, but literally, can you step into the same river? Let's say Amazon River. Can you step twice into the same Amazon River? What happens?
The water keeps moving.
The water is moving. Is it the same river? Or is it different river? The water is different. So if you step there one morning, next morning, you step into a completely different body of water. The water you stepped in previously is long gone, maybe in the ocean or something. Right? Everything changes. The sun is new every day. That seems a little crazy, but I guess he's had his reason. Where does the sun go when night falls? Is it the same sun in the morning? Well, we today would say, yeah, the earth will circle the sun. But for many Greeks, it seemed like, why should it be the same? Looks the same, but does it mean it's the same? Do things which look the same are always the same? No. Changing defeats that threat. So everything which seems to be a threat is actually changing. Even the faucet was like this type of a drink they have. Even the faucet separates if it's not been stirred. So if you do not constantly stir it, it separates. All things are exchanged for fire, and fire for all things, as goods for gold and gold for good. That's another one of his saying. So he's basically saying that fire is in everything. Fire to him was the longest, and it was the main element of everything around it. The fire, he says, this world order, this cosmos, the same for all, none of the gods nor of man has made, but it was always, and is, and shall be, ever living fire, which has been kindled in measures and extinguished in measures. So the world is eternal. It had no beginning. It's just this fire which is constantly burning and burning and burning all those things. And the fire is there yet. Everything is fire. He was also trying to explain what the soul is. Soul is fire. It's what directs us. It's like burning inside of us, and you say, don't get dry. Why shouldn't you get dry? Because when you dry up, you die. This fire gets gone. Also, don't get wet. Again, wetness distinguishes the fire. Soul will only have afterlife if it is pure when it dies. If you don't have a pure soul, no afterlife for you. Now, the most important goal to achieve, according to him, in life is understanding of the laws, understanding of this rational structure of reality. Homer wasn't trying to do it. That's why Homer is bad. Wisdom is divine. It's the best way of life. Most people don't understand it. They just go after simple things like food, shelter, but that to him is not the most important. People should become closer to God by attaining wisdom. Here's another one of his saying, listening not to me, but to the Logos, which kind of speaks by itself. It is right to agree that all things are one. What is he trying to say about that? That idea will actually come back later. All things are one. What do you think? Let's just try to speculate. Do you see any reason to that? How can all things be one? In what sense? We come from one thing. So basically, like the entire world is one thing, right? And we all part of it, and everything is part of it. So in that sense, there's no difference between different people or people and animals or even people and fruit tree. Because we all part of the same whole. The whole thing is one thing. It's not different. things taken together are whole and not whole, being brought together, brought apart, from tune and out of tune. Out of all things there comes a unity, and out of unity all things. So basically everything is together and not together. Sometimes it seems like it is together, but it's not, it falls apart. Sometimes it falls apart and you think it's separated, but it's coming back together. Unity of opposites. So he basically, that's one of the most influential of his ideas. Let's just read it. They do not understand how, though it variance with itself, it agrees with itself. It is backward turning, determined like that of a bow and a tire. The bow, what is happening with the bow? What is the bow? So you have like some sort of piece of wood or whatever, right? And you have a string. What's happening? Tension, right? It's under tension. That's what makes it what it is. If you remove the tension, you destroy it. Tension has to be there. Not too much tension. If you have too much tension, what will happen? It will break. But if you remove the tension completely again, that's useless. So this tension has to be present, and the lyre is a similar thing. The lyre has strings which has to be under tension. So what he's saying here is that things do need to have tension. There has to be resistance. There has to be some sort of something which is not peaceful, you may say, present in order for the world to exist. The unity of opposites. These are opposites. It's at the same time as tension, and it also is seemingly at rest. But this is important part of reality. What is opposite brings together. The finest harmony is composed of invariants. Everything comes to be in accordance with strife. And that's another interesting of his idea. He thinks justice is actually strife. Completely different from Anaximander, for whom justice was equalization. To God, all things are beautiful and good and just, but humans have supposed some unjust and some unjust. What is he trying to say with this? If something happens, humans say it is unjust. But he thinks if it happens, it's just, because God, what it was just. It has to be happening. War is the father of all and king of all. And some he shows as gods, others as humans, some he makes slaves, and others free. That's one of his most famous sayings. So think about it. What is he trying to say? War is the father of all and king of all. Some he shows as God, others as humans. Some he makes slaves. Yes.
I feel like he's saying like war is the thing that would distinguish one from another, because then it would kind of like how Homer has that concept of being warrior-like. He's like, when it comes to war, you figure out who is the stronger amongst the weaker.
Yeah, there's some similarity here to Homer, but he has a different idea there. Overall, he just says that war is necessary in everything. It's a part of normal life, and it actually is just when the war happens that some people win, others do not. So to him, that is the part of justice. The justice is actually that some people are stronger than others, and they deserve. So it's not eye for an eye. It is, if I can take your eye and you can take mine, that's justice. That is his idea of justice. Whether you agree with him or not, but that is what he thinks. So that is very, very different. Let's discuss it a little bit in the remainder of the class, because we have very much time for today. So what do you think justice is? Do you agree with Anaximander that it's equalization, or do you agree with Heraclitus that it's actually war? And It's just that some people have more than others. It's just that some people achieve more than others. Yeah.
Well, I want to say like justice is meant to be like fair, but if someone has something more than you, but they worked for it, then that's fair. I would say, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how to explain.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Okay, yeah, so basically if you work harder, if you can. So that's not equalization in the sense that like, let's just take everything and give everybody an equal share, because that would then seem like you don't need to work hard. Why work hard? Others, let them work hard. I'm not gonna do it. I'll still get the same share. But there is a bit of a problem with that now. And we'll talk about it when we talk about Plato, but just even right now, what do you think, guys, is a problem with this approach? Yeah.
I can't wait to talk about Marxism, but in his concept, it's like everyone can do what they can give. For instance, there's people with disabilities. So someone that's full, willing, and able with their mind, body, and soul is not the same as somebody that has a disability and can't use their mind or their body or their soul. So you take in their eyes clearly a problem with that. They can't, move their body to take your eye, but they can use what they can use to defeat you in other ways. So I don't believe in either of their concepts because there's so many things that would separate one person from another, and that sense of justice is like kind of, it's not thinking of everything in every way.
So it's not just Marx. Marx actually read and what he wrote his thesis, believe it or not, on democracy. So he knew the Greeks. And what he was basing his ideas on, a lot of it comes from Republic by Plato. We'll talk about Republic by Plato in a couple of minutes, actually getting there. But the idea here is, yes, where do you start? Right? Because, yes, work hard, but let's think about it. There's two people. One of them grows up in a ghetto, his or her parents are drug addicts, and the other one, his parents are billionaires, and they take them to the best school and give them best education. Are they equal? If they put the same amount of effort, would their achievement be the same? No. In fact, the first one very likely will end up in jail, whereas the other one may become a billionaire himself, because the minimum effort is needed if you're a son of billionaire to become a billionaire. But don't pull it up. Right? So that's the idea. Like, yes, if you can achieve more, you should have more. But where do you start? What is there to begin with? That should be equalized towards how do you know? But we'll come back to that next week. For now, that's all we got. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. We'll talk more about